This might come as a surprise to some of you, but this vehicle here is one of the most requested new vehicles for us to feature here on Test Drive. Our spotlight is on this 2019 Buick Envision. It is the all-wheel drive Premium 2, and is the top-end trim here in Canada, and is configured probably what most people would be looking at if they were in the top-end market for it. It has a $1,685 dual-panel moonroof, has a $1,975 driver confidence package, and then also a $3,480 Envision Appearance Package. The MSRP as configured is $56,440 Canadian, and this is also built in China. So we're going to be going over everything about this car, taking it on a drive, and going over everything you need to know if you're in the market for the Buick from China. So yes, the Buick Envision is a Chinese assembled vehicle, but further to that, it's actually a design that was intended for the Chinese market. This vehicle was launched in China, and it actually took a few years before it came here to the United States and Canada, which is very interesting. You know, Buick has always sort of been GM's import division, aside from Saturn, but that doesn't exist anymore, but they've always kind of brought over the European stuff from Opel before it was sold to Group PSA. But now they're bringing in the Chinese stuff. So not only is this a Chinese-built vehicle, but it was also designed for life in China. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit on the inside. If you watch our show regularly every week, you'll know that last week we featured the Cadillac XT4. So maybe go and watch that video first, because even though this is not a badge-engineered version of it, in fact, this really is a unique vehicle in GM's portfolio, they both are compact crossovers. But this is quite different, and in fact, being a little bit less expensive than the XT4, actually has a couple features on the inside, again, that are really designed for the Chinese market that weren't on the XT4. But I want to go over some of the important stuff here. There's a 2-liter LTG inline-4 turbo engine, produces 252 horsepower or 188 kilowatts. It runs on the same 9-speed automatic transmission we've been seeing for a little while now. That is a joint venture between Ford and General Motors. And it also has bi-LED headlights up front, LED taillights, halogen fog lights, and there is quite a bit of sound insulation going on with this vehicle. We'll talk about that more on the road test, but it has an acoustic laminated windshield with active noise cancellation coming out of the Bose speaker system. So there's a lot going on for it. It is a facelift for 2019. It was shown off actually a couple years ago, again in China, but for 2019, we are getting it. And aside from that, I have to say that it is a handsome looking vehicle. I don't know if really the Ventaports are necessary anymore. We're not seeing them on all of Buick's products. They don't do anything. For me, I couldn't care less if they're there. Maybe for the buyers who are actually looking at these vehicles, and we've talked about it before, Buick has an age problem when it comes to their vehicles. A lot of the people who are looking at them are in their senior years. It's hard to get fresh blood in, so maybe those buyers are interested in having the Ventaports there, whether they work or not. Somebody like me, I don't really care, but I do think it is a handsome looking vehicle. Now I want to talk about two of the packages. I think the sunroof is pretty self-explanatory. It's a dual panel moonroof up top, but the driver confidence package adds three things: adaptive front cruise control, surround vision, not HD cameras. They're far from HD. In fact, very similar quality to what we see on Mazda products. It's very unfortunate. And then forward auto braking. The Envision package, which I think probably most people will skip, but you never know, comes with really only two things: the molded side steps that are built into the side and 19-inch aluminum rims. Now to be fair, the side steps here are pretty useless for somebody like me. I can get into the vehicle with no issues, and my daughter can do that as well. But perhaps again, as I mentioned, the demographic for these cars is quite a bit older, especially older than me, so it might help for them. Who knows, they're kind of low, but whatever. Getting into the car, for me at least, is relatively easy. Now around back, they do have some styling cues, I'd say, from the previous generation BMW X5. I just get that vibe a little bit from the taillights. You do have an easy opening trunk. You can swipe your foot underneath and it will open up. Plus you have the buttons to be able to do it there. Trunk size is pretty good. The one thing I noted when I was going back there is the exact same door handles that you use to open up the doors are there to fold the seats flat. So it really looks like GM just jumped into the parts bin to collect whatever they could, probably to cut costs on it. But overall, it's not a bad looking vehicle on the outside. or the inside. So I want to go inside now and talk about the features there, and we'll take it on a very quiet road test. Now I mentioned outside that this car has some Chinese inspiration to it. I'll talk about that more in the rear seats, but I do want to talk about the design and layout here. It is somewhat similar to the Buick LaCrosse that we featured last year. The center area here is relatively large, big piece of wood on either side of the instrument cluster area here. You do have some wood along the door trim, and then a leatherette along the dashboard, top of the door cards, and center console area. So the trim here is pretty nice. You have a Bose audio system too, which sounds about as good as any other Bose system could. Steering wheel is pretty much standard Buick, along with the infotainment system and the center gauge cluster. There isn't anything new here that we haven't seen before, except for the analog clock. Don't know if it's a big feature. I know a lot of manufacturers have sort of taken that away, so whether you like it or not, it is there. One thing to note about the tri-zone automatic climate control system, more so when it comes to the buttons for the actual temperature or heated and ventilated front seats, is like a touch button, but it's not a real button. Can get a little used to. I'm not a huge fan of it, but for the most part, it works. Everything else, though, really is laid out as you would expect it to be. It isn't overly exciting in here. Luxury level, like I said, is pretty good. For thinking to really the gold standard for us in the compact crossover market, the Mazda CX-5 Signature, I'd say that they do offer a lot of the same stuff. Head-up display, all the safety tech, navigation, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, center console is quite nice. Makes sense. It's a little bit more upscale, I'd say. I do like the interior of this, despite it not being over the top, but I do like it. I think it'd be nice, though, maybe with some black headliner over the white, but what can you do? We mentioned in the XT4 video that I was happy to see a phone charger I could use. This is back to GM's standard style of phone charging. On the wireless charger side here, you can't actually fit it. They put a lot of rubbering in here, and my iPhone 8 Plus doesn't fit even if I take the case off. It just isn't a nice setup here. But aside from that, though, really does make sense. Again, it's not overly exciting, but it is a comfortable ride. Now here's why I say that this is Chinese inspired. In China, people like to be driven around. A lot of people will buy a car and have somebody drive them for them. So a feature like tri-zone climate control is a plus. And it is on this vehicle, but not on something like the Cadillac XT4. So the rear seats there have their own zone for climate as well as heat in the back. It's a small thing that you get on top of the XT4, but again, all the other tech that we would expect to find on a vehicle like this, LED lights, HomeLink, panoramic sunroof, center console up top here is kind of straightforward, doesn't really get you too excited, but it gets the job done. The only main feature we don't see here that we have seen on some other Buick vehicles is their rear view monitor system. It's just a regular mirror here. Perhaps if Buick does decide to avenir this, then you might get that option. But I gotta say that for the most part, I'm quite happy with this trim. We were a little disappointed when we drove the LaCrosse Avenir. We just felt that it was missing some of the features. You do have rain sensing wipers, but the real big thing about this vehicle, and something that we continue to talk about when it comes to Buicks, is the ride and the quietness on the inside here, which is why I say we're gonna take it on a quiet road test. We're not necessarily gonna be doing a lot of performance stuff with it, because people who want to buy this car want something that isn't sporty, but comfortable and quiet. Do you hear that? You shouldn't, at least not that much. And that's the whole point. This car is pretty quiet. And that's what I've come to realize about almost all the Buicks that we've driven so far on test drive. The only exception really is the Regal. It was a more sport-oriented car, but both the LaCrosse and the Enclave and now the Envision are incredibly quiet vehicles, and they're very smooth on the road. And I guess that's what Buick's whole proposition point is. Something I've been asked actually a lot more over the last couple months is what kind of car can you get if you just want comfort and none of the sportiness? Buick. I mean, if you think about it, you take a look at any of the luxury-oriented cars now, Mercedes, Audi, BMW, they've always had a flair for the performance-oriented and the sport aspect. But I mean, if you just want comfort, you don't want a flashy car, you don't necessarily need the performance, you don't want to hear the car as you're going along, there's not a lot of options out there because everybody wants to make a sports car, but not Buick, and that's a good thing. We talked about this last week with the Cadillac XT4. That vehicle served a purpose, filled a segment for people who wanted something that the Cadillac XT4 provided. And now this Buick Envision fills yet another little hole in the market for vehicles that just aren't designed to be sporty. I like the look of it. It's handsome. The interior here is functional. Maybe not so much the charger for the phone here, where it sticks up with my iPhone 8 Plus about 1.5 inches, but it does work. Just don't like that rubber going into it. But this is a vehicle that isn't designed for enthusiasts, and that's fine. In fact, it's great because almost every other vehicle now, including cars that really weren't designed for the sport-oriented people, like the Toyota RAV4, are now getting more aggressive with the styling. They're adding more features, more performance, more sport. So if you really do want something that doesn't have any of that, this is the crossover for you. And I have to say that it is noticeably quiet in here. In fact, you shouldn't be able to hear too much of the outside world here, and we're not using the best equipment we can to record. But I mean, when I'm driving along, I don't really hear the engine a whole lot, at least not as much as I do in other crossovers. You know, the seats are okay. They're a little hard for me, but they do get the job done. But the ride is really smooth as well. When you mix the smooth ride with not having to hear the engine or transmission, along with the fact that this is a comfortable vehicle, it really makes sense for people who are looking at this car. Again, it's not going to be for everybody. It's probably not going to be for most of the viewers of this show, but it is an interesting vehicle because it is quiet. And it's surprising because, you know, you usually expect the bigger cars you get, you know, something like the Buick Enclave will be more quiet. You don't really expect that necessarily in the compact segment, but really the loudest thing here is the turn signal. And that's not too bad. But why is this vehicle so quiet? Well, I mentioned a couple of those aspects while we were outside. It has an acoustic sound insulation windshield here, so that helps to reduce some of the road noise there. It also uses active noise cancellation, just like you might find on a really high quality pair of headphones, where it takes the outside noise and essentially uses the opposite noise to mute it, to delete it from your hearing. And it really works. Like, you have to drive this vehicle to understand just what I'm talking about. Because again, our equipment isn't going to be the best. You're still going to hear a lot of what the background noise is that you might not even hear too much if you were driving it. But it is quiet. And it fills a segment for people who want something that is not sporty. And there's no shame in that. That's the whole reason why there are so many car brands out there and why each brand has so much to choose from. Because if there was just one size fits all when it comes to a vehicle, we'd all be driving BMWs. We're not, because there's something for everybody out here, and that's why I think people are going to be interested in this vehicle. That might be one of the reasons why you guys asked for us to feature it. I have seen these on the road. I haven't seen the 2019s so far, but then again, I don't have the keenest eye when it comes to this specific model, but I have seen a number of Envisions on the road. So people are looking for them. And again, it fills a void in the marketplace that has pretty much been polluted with sport activity vehicles, the sport portion of the activity vehicle. And not everybody wants that. So again, power, 252 horsepower. I could show you the performance stuff, but it doesn't matter. It does not matter for this vehicle. You can get onto the highway and merge into traffic if you need to. If you have to pick up, it will go. There's no sport setting, nothing like that. You basically have a traction control button, and that's about it. So there isn't a whole lot of control for what you can do with this vehicle. But the whole point of it is to be comfortable, to provide you with a different experience that you would get, say, on something like the Cadillac XT4. Because again, it's just geared towards a slightly different buyer, somebody who wants something that just works. Let's dive right into our wrap-up. The 2019 Buick Envision all-wheel drive completed our 100-kilometer test loop with an average fuel economy of 8.1 liters per 100 kilometers, or 29 US miles per gallon, which is about what the Cadillac XT4 did, a bit better than the 2.4-liter Kia Sportage, but a little ways off the current leader in the compact crossover segment based on our testing, the 2019 Subaru Forester Sport. Now let's talk likes and dislikes. First up, the likes. It's hard not to list the overall quietness of the ride as our first like, as it's a noticeable feature for the Envision and Buick in general. The ride was also smooth, considering Buick isn't using GM's magnetic ride control or the adaptive suspension we saw on the XT4, but rather the high-per or high-performance strut technology found on vehicles like the LaCrosse, making this the first crossover in their lineup to use this enhanced McPherson strut suspension. While the 2-liter turbocharged engine isn't as powerful as its direct competitors, the Acura RDX and the Infiniti QX50, it does have a slight power boost over the XT4 and delivered smooth acceleration mixed with the quietness we'd expect from a Buick. And the rear seat automatic climate control system was another plus over the XT4. And while the Envision will likely be a suitable crossover for Buick's intended demographic, we do have a few dislikes to talk about. First off, the 7-speaker Bose audio system isn't bad, but it is one of the least amount of speakers we've seen on a premium system to date. We also disliked the seats. Not that they were overly bad, but we found that the backrest to be very firm even after deflating the lumbar support. The 360-degree camera resolution is laughably bad, making it difficult to distinguish an oncoming vehicle from a medium-sized child running onto the road. An overall price is going to be the showstopper for new buyers who aren't already invested in the Buick world. Both the RDX and QX50 offer arguably more to buyers for about the same price, though Buick is really in a position to have a premium compact crossover that is far from sporty as it can get, and that's likely going to be a plus for a number of buyers. In a market where every manufacturer is racing to make their vehicles more performance-oriented, shaving off the rough edges to improve aerodynamics and aggressiveness, Buick is providing buyers with a unique alternative that fills a growing void in the world of sporty vehicles.